This is Daniel Simon at Baton Rouge Community College. And of course, I want to welcome you to the first week of classes at BRCC. For the first week of classes, I'll have a prehistory lecture, which kind of goes into the background of early humans. I also talk about the background of the origins of history, especially with the father of history. I'll kind of mention about Herodotus, who's very important to the development of history as we know it. But I'll get mostly into discussing the Stone Age, how early humans developed first in Africa, and then I'll kind of talk about how over time humans developed during the Neolithic period, farming, which farming led to eventually civilizations. And I'll kind of also talk about the background of the River Valley civilizations. These are really the first major civilizations like ancient Mesopotamia, where humans really start to create real civilization. And so that first week, I'll have an assessment, which is Canvas quiz number one, which will be on the background of prehistory. So that's going to be our upcoming first lecture of the week that I'll have. And then, like I said, next week, I'll get into some of the real civilizations like ancient Mesopotamia. So yeah, let me get into first and talk about, like I said, the background of history. You know much about history? It goes back to mostly Greek times. It was mostly the ancient Greeks that started history, like 3,000 to 3,000 years ago. Would be about the time period when it kind of got started. History's been around. Like people have been, writing some kind of forms of history, going back to like cave paintings, right? And like in, prehistoric times, that kind of thing, or people, telling oral stories, I think was an early form, or oral history would be like an early form of history. You got biblical history, like the Bible being written, epic poems and poetry, I think are also considered like forms of history, like the Iliad written by Homer or something like that, etc. But it wasn't really until the Greeks that you really get, the development of, historiography, where, the writing of prose type writing to, chronicleize the ways of people and things like that, and human culture being developed, etc. You can see there, if you blow it up, you can see that the origin of the word history comes from the Greek word historia, which means in Greek to inquiry. To inquire, which is trying to find, like, investigate or find information or knowledge about the past. And so historians are kind of like social scientists that are trying to uncover the past using, like, historical means like written records, and predominantly is what they're mostly looking for, things like that. That could be anything from books that were written, letters, and so on, that, that kind of left around from a long time ago. But you can see, obviously, it could be a chronological record of events, of things that have happened a long time ago, a tale or a story, a record of explanation of past events. So pretty much anything could be history. Even, stuff you did yesterday, is considered now history, of course. Pretty much, you think about that. Here's by the way, I'll kind of show you this right here, but you can see the difference between what they call history versus prehistory, which we'll get to later. Which you see on the left, history is more of the study of the past based on written records. So you have things that are written a long time ago that people have been able to kind of chronicleize some kind of forms of history with it. And then prehistory on the right, you can see, is the study of the period of time before written records. In fact, prehistory really means before history. That's what it basically means. See, information can be gained about history through written records. You see with history. Now, on the right, you can see information can be gained about prehistory through ancient carvings, artifacts, and things like that were left behind, like, say, by humans, etc. History is the time of the period after prehistory, when you have, like, civilizations, things like that. And then prehistory is the time period before history, where written records kind of come along. Then prehistory, you see, is research by prehistoric, like archaeologists, physical anthropologists, and things like that. And then history is mainly researched by historians, is what it is. I think I've got some kind of, I think where it is, we show down here. I'll get to it in a second later, but I'll talk about how prehistory, there's a lot of scientists involved with that, like anthropologists and archaeologists and things like that that are kind of important with it overall. Now, we do have Herodotus, who I was kind of talking about a few minutes ago about Herodotus is seen as the so-called father of history. He lived about in the mid 5th century BC in Greece, and he was very famous for writing some of the first historical works, really that are kind of prose type writing in a sense. So it'd be history. I guess you also kind of see him as the father of maybe even literature in a sense, because he was one of the first to write a series of books like that. And they often go by different names. I know the common name of his books are often been called the Histories. It's like 9 book series that he wrote. And some people do call it the history of the Persian Wars, which they think the Persian Wars, at least the books about the Greco-Persian Wars between Greece and the Persian Empire that was being fought in the 5th century, mostly they think they wrote those series of books sometime between about maybe 430 to about 440 BC. I think it's about the time period of it. And so that's why historians later kind of, and other people start calling him the father of history, because he was one of the first to influence other historians to basically write history. They do have this man named Cicero, you may have heard of. And Cicero was a famous Roman statesman. I think he was a Roman senator too. I think well known for being a great speaker. And he was the one who coined the term "father of history," describing the importance of Herodotus a long time ago in ancient times. There is another man you may have heard of named Voltaire. You may have heard of him, who I think lived. If you know about him in the 18th century, he claimed that Herodotus was sometimes called the father of lies, because sometimes he would exaggerate some of his writings. And that is one thing that a lot of the ancient historians are kind of known for. They are prone to exaggeration, like when they write and they'll say there's a battle and there's 1 million people fighting, and there's not really. So just kind of, I guess they're just, kind of exaggerate also to sell books, get people to read them and so on. But anyway, let me move on. I'm going to talk about also the background of prehistory. Of course, the main thing we'll get to today is talking about prehistoric man, in where humans all first developed a long time ago. First, want to talk about the importance of a lot of the early scientific fields, like those you see there. Kind of expand that. Paleontology, anthropology, geology, archaeology. Those are a lot of the scientific fields that really are important in really the study of early humans. So there's, like I said, like we talked about, there's no written records. So it's like not much to go on from a long time ago, from thousands or millions of years ago. And so we have to rely a lot on a lot of these scientific fields to study a lot about human development in the earth and so on. And so that's why those fields are pretty important. Paleontology, anthropology, geology, of course, and archaeology. And if you know about anthropology, it originally started probably back in maybe the 19th century. Then archaeology kind of broke away from it, basically. But paleontology is more like studying the ancient, like bones and things like that left behind, like dinosaurs and humans. Geology, more of a study of the earth. Anthropology is more of a study of like human culture, things like that. Then archaeology is more like a study of like ancient civilizations, etc., or old civilizations, I guess, a long time ago. You can see how they break down history, by the way. Like, so prehistoric times, you see go back, at least with human development, go back to the Stone Age, which you see. So going back maybe 3 million years ago, roughly. And they divide the Stone Age into different periods, like sub periods. The two main sub periods are Paleolithic and Neolithic, which both those mean Old Stone Age and New Stone Age. I think later there's a Mesolithic age they kind of add in later overall, which they think that the term, so right here, but they have this thing called the three age system you may have heard about also as well. It's this idea they kind of developed in the 19th century by this man named CJ or Christian Thompson developed it. He was a Danish, he was like an early scientist. And he basically broke down human development like a long time ago in ancient times into like the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, and the Iron Age, because that was like the main technologies that they used, like with tools and weapons, etc. And so usually like a Stone Age over here, and you got your Metal Ages. And there is like a Copper Age that's kind of between the Stone Age and the Bronze Age that also exists as well, but it's kind of minor. But the Stone Age usually ends about 3000 BC. And then I think the Bronze Age ends about 1200 BC. And then the Iron Age, I think, goes up to like the Roman period, pretty much. But this man here, John Lubbock, you may have heard of him. He's an Englishman, kind of like a politician, but he was also like a kind of a scientist back in the 19th, like a polymath. And he was the one that kind of first came up with the idea of the Stone Age existing and the fact that it was broken up into two different periods, which he coined the term Paleolithic and Neolithic. Describe the different parts of the Stone Age, which I'll later talk about those, kind of get more into like the Stone Age and talk about that. But I'll kind of first go ahead and talk about really like the development of early humans and where humans kind of spread from Africa from. If you look at this map here, they think that Homo sapiens, or what we call like a lot of the early humans, developed first in Africa, like Southern Africa, and especially in East Africa. It's one of the main areas they developed the most. What you see is like 200,000 years ago or more, like 200 to 300,000 is usually, I think, the range they consider. And then you can see how some humans then eventually spread into Europe, then into Asia. Like you see, they all got all the way down also into like Australia in that area of the world. And then eventually it took them a while, but like close to 15,000 years ago, you can see how humans eventually spread to basically the Americas. That took much longer for that to, of course, occur. But you can see how humans eventually spread, pretty much throughout the world. We're primarily going to talk about the so-called hominins, which the hominins are mostly like, humans that, especially the extinct ones that they think archaic humans that existed at one point throughout the world. And I'll kind of talk about a few of those today, but I want to first talk about like where in Africa, like a lot of the early humans developed. If you know about Africa, Africa is often considered to be they call it the cradle of humankind, because that's where humans first developed like a long time ago. If you look at this image, you can see that in East Africa, that was one of the main areas where a lot of humans developed like a long time ago. So-called Great Rift Valley. It's a very prime area where they found a lot of fossils throughout the world. From like Ethiopia around that area down into Kenya and Tanzania, those have been areas that have been ripe for a lot of fossils. You can kind of see that lake. I think is a kind of a lake down there. I think, well, there's a bunch of lakes down there, like Lake Victoria in that area, but also Lake Rudolph, I think, which is kind of like between Ethiopia and Kenya. They found a lot of like fossils throughout that area. And so it's very close to the equator, kind of a warm area. So I think that climate was right for a lot of humans first developing there a long time ago. Tanzania is like very famous for like one of the locations where a lot of these early like archaic human fossils were first found. It's probably the most famous is the Olduvai Gorge. You may have heard about where a lot of paleoanthropologists have gone there and worked there a long time ago. The most famous is the Leakeys. If you know about, you may have heard of the Leakeys, like Lewis and Mary Leakey. They're very well known. Paleoanthropologists, archaeologists. They did a lot of the pioneering into a lot of the work on like the origins of humans in Africa, especially East Africa in general. Louis Leakey is probably one of the most famous that's associated with that, who's pretty important. I'll kind of go through and talk about some of these archaic human type fossils that they've discovered, including myself, I guess. Kind of threw that in there. But anyway, yeah, the big ones they talk about, top left, you can see Australopithecus. I think you may have heard of that one. It's very well known. Considered one of the oldest, they think, early human ancestors that are kind of related back to maybe us later, maybe the link that's linked to us, they think, overall. Of course, Lucy, I'll get to that one. There's one you see it right there, top left, that's well known. Bottom left, Homo habilis, which was found later, like around the 1950s or 1960s in Africa, in Tanzania originally. The one that's kind of in the middle on the left is also Homo erectus. That's also well known. That's the one that's got the complete skeleton you see there. Later, one of the first major big game hunters that you hear about, of course, in the world. Then they have also like Homo sapiens, like the early archaic Homo sapiens, like Neanderthal man, of course, which is that skull kind of on the right, the top. You see there, that kind of large skull next to the smaller one. That's, of course, Neanderthal human. And then they also have the Cro-Magnon human, of course, which you see next to me. That one, like right there. That one, of course, is more like related to us. Like I think one of the first famous human cultures that's related to humans later. Homo sapiens, sapiens, I think is the common term, of course, they used later for, of course, humans. So, and I think I'll get to later, Homo sapiens means either wise man or thinking man. It's usually the translation of it, but I'll get to that later about that. But then we get into some of the examples of some of these different types of archaic human type fossils they found like a long time ago. The most famous that they talk about is Lucy. Of course, they found a bunch of these in Africa. Australopithecus, which there's, I think, two different genus that's kind of famous. Afferensis, and they have another one, Africanus, that's also well known. Lucy was a early ancestor of humans that was found in northern Ethiopia in 1974. This man named Donald Johanson, you see, there's an American paleoanthropologist. Anyway, it's kind of important because it was one of the first complete skeletal remains found of that type of old ancestor of humans from a long time ago. And so some people think it's a link with later humans that we have, like the Homo genus type humans later. If you know about the name, why they call her Lucy, they think it was some type of young female that had fallen out of a tree and had died. Because of the Beatles, if you know about that, the Beatles had this song called Lucy in the Sky of Diamonds. It became kind of connected with her, and so they named her Lucy, basically. But they think she was like maybe a 12-year-old female, I think is what they estimate Lucy was. And the brain size was maybe about, I think it's like 500 cubic centimeters was how big the brain size of Lucy, which is maybe close to a chimpanzee's size. And they do think that early ancestors of humans may have lived like in trees originally a long time ago before they began to walk basically bipedal, etc. So I was kind of talking about Lucy. So that one, and by the way, the name Australopithecus, it means southern ape man. That's the actual translation of the actual Latin name you're looking at right there. Let me also talk about another one that's real famous as well, if I can find it. Oh, there's right there. Homo habilis. May have heard of that one, which is well known. Homo habilis is a very famous archaic human that was found in I think around the 1960s by Louis Leakey in Tanzania originally. And Homo habilis is important because it's considered one of the first humans that use like basically tools. And in fact, the name Homo habilis, you see, either means handyman or it can mean also skilled man. So it's either one is what it means. And they do think a lot of the early humans like Homo habilis were meat eaters. So they began to eat meat and they used like stone tools to like cut up their meat or kill animals with it. And Leakey, and along with Mary Leakey, found a lot of these like skeletal remains of Homo habilis in Tanzania, like in that Olduvai Gorge I'm kind of talking about here. And they're kind of important with the early origins of humans and especially East Africa. And I think the dating of Homo habilis, it varies, but 2.5 to 3 million years ago is about how far back they went to. So they more went back to the beginning of the Paleolithic age. Would be like the time period of what we're talking about. They did have this thing I did want to mention about. There is, of course, an example right there. They have these stone tools that they made where they took a rock and they banged it against pebbles to make an edge with it. And they were called Oldowan tools, I think is what they call the tool industry they developed to do this. Named after the gorge, Olduvai Gorge we're talking about. They call it a pebble chopper, I think was the common name they used. But the Homo habilis was known for that type of stone tool industry that they had. And so they used it as a tool, I guess, kill animals or cut up meat and things like that. And they used tools for. So Homo habilis is kind of considered to be really the first actual Homo genus that you have that kind of influences later humans that come in Africa and spread to the rest of the world. So that's why the Homo habilis is kind of important in the early origins of humans. Now they have also Homo erectus, which also Homo erectus is sometimes called Homo ergaster, I think is another common name also as well. Homo erectus is a very famous archaic human that dates back close to 2 million years in Africa. In fact, Homo erectus, it means upright man, because if you study about Homo erectus, it was considered one of the first humans that walked upright, like bipedal, like on 2 feet. And Homo erectus is considered one of the first humans that would begin to spread outside of Africa. It left Africa, they think, and eventually spread to like Europe and Asia. Now, think out of all the different archaic humans, like a long time ago, it was the most influential. That influenced like later cultures and things like that. They were known for different things. Homo erectus. Homo erectus was one of the first to develop like the stone hand axe, which is common, throughout the Stone Age. Use of spears, which I guess eventually they go to the throwing spear over time. The addle, you may have heard of that. And then use of fire was something else that you start to see pretty much by the time of Homo erectus coming in. And they even have their own. I'll kind of show you examples of here. That right there is probably the most famous fossil that was ever found, of course, of Homo erectus, which is Turkana Boy, which was found in 1984. It was found in northern Kenya near Lake Rudolph, and it was found by these two men that were involved in a lot of discoveries of like. I think you study Richard Leakey and Kamoya Kimu. They were involved in a lot of fossil hunting, trying to search for various, I guess, archaic human fossils, hominin fossils in Africa, especially like around Kenya and all that. And I think it's Kamoya Kimu was the one that found actually Turkana Boy, which you see right here. And Turkana Boy was believed to be some kind of young boy that may have been 12 years old or maybe younger that had died young. And they think it dates to like 1.5 million years ago. is how old Turkana Boy. So it's one of the most complete fossils that's ever been found of a Homo erectus. Although I think they call that one Homo ergaster, is what they actually called it. But it's like basically the same kind of culture, is what it is. But yeah, they find Homo erectus all over the place, like even like close to Indonesia, in Java, originally going back to the late 19th century. Eugene Dubois found what they call Java man, some fossil remains of what they think is a type of Homo erectus that was living where close to Indonesia is, right there. And then in China in the 1930s, they found, they think, what are remnants of skeletal remains of Homo erectus that were living in caves uh, somewhere along the Yellow River Valley north of Beijing. And so they have evidence of, also early archaic humans like that living in parts of East Asia as well. So this type of, early human was starting to spread throughout parts of Eurasia rather than just Africa. There, of course, is the stone hand axe. And something, of course, like I said, that Homo erectus really starts to perfect by that time. And kind of show you a little image here. They think that's how they kind of would make a stone hand axe. There's no handle originally, I guess, going back to that time right there. But they would take a type of large rock, and they would hammer it with a stone to kind of put an edge on it, basically. Then you can see they might use a hammer, like a wood, stone, or antler type hammer, to eventually sharpen the edge up, then trim it up, and then it would become, you can see, a finished hand axe. So hence the term stone hand axe, of course, being used. And then later, of course, over time, they would put a handle on it. I guess over time, it would become like an axe, that kind of thing. But that's the early kind of technology that they had at that time. And so that's part of why they call it the Stone Age. So it's like the cell phone back then or whatever, that kind of thing. So yeah, of course. And by the way, here's the different examples of to kind of show the images of the different types of archaic, types of humans from a long time ago. There was actually one called Homo heidelbergensis. You may have heard of that one. It was like an archaic human that they think they found originally in Germany in 1907. They call it Heidelberg man. They've heard of that one. And Heidelberg man was a type of archaic human that lived mostly in parts of Europe, I think, most predominantly. He dates back to the middle Pleistocene epoch, or sometime going back to the kind of like in the middle part of the Paleolithic age, about 300 to 700,000 years ago. Will be about the time period when Heidelberg. He's not as well known, but they think that Heidelberg man is some kind of ancestor to later humans that come along. Then you got your Homo neanderthalensis or Neanderthal man that you have, and then you got your more modern humans, Cro-Magnon, Homo sapien type humans that eventually the ones we have now overall. So here's kind of reconstructions. I'll kind of talk a little bit about the Neanderthal humans a little bit before I get into like later humans. But yeah, Neanderthal humans, they date back to about 100 to 200,000 years ago. So if you know about Neanderthal man, they were mostly predominant in parts of Europe and also parts of Asia, especially southwestern Asia. And one thing about the Neanderthal humans, they were big game hunters. They mostly were kind of a stocky human. I think males on average were about 5'6". One thing about Neanderthal humans, they were known for having a large cranium, like one of the largest brain cases of any kind of human, I think, in pretty much history. I think the average brain size of a Neanderthal was like 14 to, I think it was like, what was it, 1,400 to, some large size, 1,400 to 1,600 cubic centimeters. Average human today is 1,200 to 1,400. Now, to give you an idea of it. They were first found in Germany in the 1850s, 1856, in I think what would be the western part of Germany, a place called Neanderthal, Germany, which means Neander Valley, I think is what it means in German. And so the name Neanderthal was basically the term they basically used later for it That's actually the scientific name, though. Homo neanderthalensis is the common scientific name that they use. And they are known for different kinds of technology that you may have heard about. One thing about Neanderthal man, they were the first to use flint tools, which I think the common term they used for the flint tool industry was called Mousterian, the Mousterian tool industry, which is a term I think they get from France, I think originally. But they're the first to use flint tools. And there's one thing that they're famous for, the Neanderthals. They use some kind of special tar that was made from the birch tree. I think it's called birch tar. They use it to attach a lot of the implements, like the stone tools, to like like the points or whatever, to like spears and so on. So that's like Neanderthal humans, but they do think that Neanderthal humans eventually went extinct. They do have some evidence that they may have lived down to like 30 to 50,000 years ago, but because of the rise of like modern humans we have later, like Homo sapiens sapiens, uh, because of the competition between both of those, they think they went extinct. That's what occurred. So it's an extinct archaic human that, of course, doesn't exist anymore. Now, here's kind of a difference you can see, by the way, between like humans today and also Neanderthals. So you can see, yeah, they have like more heavier brow ridges above the eye sockets. Is something that's different. And they have more of a receding forehead, you can see. Also, their jaw is a little larger also as well. Of course, there's different theories on why the skulls are different with some humans, that kind of thing. I think the theory about it, it's a combination of like the fact that humans a long time ago had higher levels of testosterone than like humans today. So that created more of a masculine looking face. But they think also a combination of genetics and climate may have also influenced it also as well. But over time, humans become more skinnier, their frame becomes more skinnier, their faces are more smoother also as well. But yeah, early Homo sapiens, you can see right there in that image, like the so-called Cro-Magnon man is really considered to be one of the first that really comes about. It's the first really dominant human culture you see that some of the later humans that we have, like Homo sapiens sapiens, which are more like a subspecies of Homo sapiens, which I told you Homo sapiens means wise man or thinking man. And they think Cro-Magnon man developed mostly in parts of Europe and maybe part of southwestern Asia as well. But they go back 50,000 years ago at the most. And one thing about the Cro-Magnon man, a lot of these other early humans, like Neanderthal humans, a lot of them lived in caves, especially like in the wintertime when it was much colder. And so that led to a lot of different types of cave art being created. You may have heard about, such as the Cro-Magnon cave, I think was considered one of the first they found, where they found cave art where they made paintings of animals in their world. And that's when they found, of course, you can see there that's in southwestern France. It was found in 1868. And so the term Cro-Magnon was a kind of a term they used later for a lot of the early human culture that develops from the Homo sapiens sapiens that are first kind of coming around at that time. The one that's more famous now is the Lascaux Cave. You may have heard about that. It's a very famous cave system that was found in 1940 during World War II, when World War II broke out between Germany, Nazi Germany, and France. Montignac, France is where it's located. And that's a very series of cave paintings that were completed, they think, sometime in the upper Paleolithic age. Maybe you can see about 17,000 years ago. It's really the most famous cave paintings they've ever discovered overall, but they've deteriorated, if you know about that, because of humans going into the cave afterwards, and they had to close it down. But I think now what you're looking at is not the original. That's the replica. They later made a replica cave, which is called Lascaux Cave 2, I think it's dubbed. And so that's what you're actually looking at right there. I don't know what it looks like now, but I'm sure it's deteriorated from what it was from a long time ago. But you can see a lot of what they painted were animals they either saw or maybe they hunted, and there's different theories on how they painted the cave paintings. I know they used a lot of natural materials, to paint a lot of the caves, whether it's clay or ochre, even blood, animal blood or animal fat may have been used. But obviously, it probably things like charcoal, um, probably also like berries and other kinds of plants could have also been used in the making of a lot of these paintings. Now, let me get into two more things I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about also the cultural stages of human development. I've kind of break that down for you, so you'll kind of know how they develop, like the stages of human development historically. You can see here, usually they break down like the Stone Age into three sub periods. The Paleolithic Age and the Neolithic Age are the two main periods they first developed during the 19th century, which I told you John Lubbock originally created, that Englishman, in the 1800s. Yeah, 1800s. And you can see the Old Stone Age, which is what Paleolithic Age means, or they say era if you want also as well. It's usually broken down into a period that's like over 2 million years. So it goes back like 2-3 million years ago. And during that time, humans lived in small clans. I think the average size of a clan might have been, I don't know, 30 to 50 people at the most. They may have lived in caves, but I think there's evidence they also lived in like huts that they built. And so humans lived a very nomadic lifestyle, moving from place to place, following animals that they're hunting. And a lot of it was because of the Ice Age. It was more of a cold climate because about this period, they're in what they call the Pleistocene epoch, which is a geological period of the Earth where the Ice Age is kind of starting to end at that time. So I think the Earth has been in like 5 ice ages, like in its history total, going back billions of years. And then they have supposedly in the 20th century, some scientists started to speak of this idea of a Mesolithic age, or we call it Middle Stone Age, where there was a transitional period between the Old and the New Stone Age, where humans started to go from hunting to farming. This is something you start seeing, which it's kind of a debate about when the Mesolithic Age was, but some people think it's right at the end of the Paleolithic Age, maybe like 15, 20,000 years ago, of maybe when it started. Now, I think they say the Mesolithic Age probably continues maybe to like 5,000 BC, would be kind of maybe where it is roughly. Then you have your Neolithic Age. You see, New Stone Age is what it means, of course. And so that's where you have humans starting to move towards agriculture. They start farming, animal husbandry. You get human civilizations like villages and cities that start to sprout up throughout the world. And so it's more like an economic and social revolution rather than, say, political, is what happens with humans. And so all this happens within like 2 or 3 million years that humans basically do this. By the way, kind of go through this here. You can see here, so your Paleolithic Age, like in the Neolithic Age, are all because of like stone implements. So that's the reason for why they use those terms for that period right there. You can see those are examples of some stone hand axes that go back 700,000 years ago, like in the Old of A Gorge I was talking about. Those are actually implements that were being used by Homo erectus, we were kind of discussing earlier. There is this warming period that comes in, which is what we have now, the Holocene epoch. They think it begins, I think the theory about the Holocene epoch was it began about 9,700 BC, or if you want the math on it, 11,700 years ago is when it started. That's when the last major glacial period ended in the world. When the glaciers start receding to the North Pole and the South Pole, basically, and it's an interglacial period. It's kind of like between ice ages, maybe, but we see this ice age still going on. We get these bad snowstorms like in the north, things like that as well. I just told you about the Neolithic, of course, or New Stone Age. You start to see that first really happen around the the Middle East, like Mesopotamia and the Fertile Crescent. That's about where they think the new Stone Age started. But like if you go to like England or something like that, Southern England, there's still like more into probably the Paleolithic age. They're kind of more behind, maybe that kind of thing. But like I guess the further away you go, from basically where Mesopotamia is, it takes a while for cultures to kind of catch up to what's kind of going on there. Let me get into like also talking about. I want to spend a few minutes discussing the different Neolithic sites that kind of are created throughout the world, because that's one thing you are going to see occur. You'll see all these ancient sites that kind of sprout up throughout the world, which a lot of them like were close to like the Middle East, and the Fertile Crescent was kind of close to where a lot of them came about originally. But you can see there, Jericho, which if you know about Jericho, it's in Palestine in the West Bank. It dates back to about 10,000 BC. That is really considered to be one of the oldest, they think, Neolithic sites, or really oldest city on Earth. Some people think, that first sprouts up throughout the world. And the dating on it varies. I know they say 10,000 BC, but a lot of times it's 8 to 10,000 BC, maybe when they think it got started. But what they do think is that it started out as a hunter-gatherer site where, hunter-gatherers kind of, I guess, had some kind of settlement where they would go out and hunt animals or whatever. And then over time, I guess through the Mesolithic into the Neolithic era, I guess later, you'll start to see transitions where it'll become more like a human settlement for like farming, etc. And its real name is Tel Es Sultan. You'll see that common name also being used as well, which I'll kind of share with you. There's kind of an image of the wall of Jericho right there. But some people call it Tal Es Sultan. It's another name, which Tel Es Sultan means Sultan's Hill. That's the archaeological name that they use to describe it. I think I've got other images right there. But I think it's not a very large site. It's only like 10 acres in size. It's about the size of Jericho. And they do think that only like a few thousand people lived there, like maybe 3,000 to 4,000 lived there at one point. But they do think it eventually becomes one of the oldest sites, of course, in the world. Here's kind of an image. They do think it had some kind of wall around it, so we call it Wall of Jericho, which is kind of a debate about how old the wall is. Some say the wall is about 8,000 years old, maybe actually 8,000 BC. Actually, is maybe how old it is. And it's very famous in the Bible. Like if you read the book of Joshua, they talk a lot about Jericho and the wall and how the Israelites conquered it, and it became one of their first major cities in like biblical times, and so it became very, very well known. Of course, it's also like a tower. I think a tower of Jericho that's also supposedly was built there on site as well. So that might be like considered, like I said, the oldest city in the world at one point, at least going back to Neolithic times. More like a village, probably more than anything. There's kind of an image right there. There's the name right there, Tel Es Sultan, Sultan's Hill. And a lot of these early like settlements a long time ago, like in ancient times, a lot of them were built on a tell, which a tell is like a hill, a lot of times built up like artificially, and so hence the name being used. Now they have another one I'll mention too called Göbekli Tepe. You may have heard of, which is in southern Turkey. It's pretty old too. It dates back, they think, 8 to 10,000 BC. And it's I think close to like maybe more towards close to like the Syrian border and all that. But the name Göbekli Tepe actually is a Turkish name that means pot belly hill, because it's like in the shape of a pot belly at the top of that hill where that tree is on top right there. It's about 50 feet tall going up there, go up the hill. And it's a 20-acre site that was found in 1963. They began to dig it up. And it's actually not a city. I don't know if you know much about Göbekli Tepe, There's different theories on why it was built, but some claim it was actually constructed as some kind of sanctuary where a lot, I think, hunter gatherers at the time uh, used as a vast temple complex where I think there's a theory they worshiped animals. I don't know if they saw them as gods or whatever, but they've actually found evidence of like animal remains where they had sacrificed animals at the site. And this 20-acre site is very famous for these megaliths that actually held up the temple, like above at one point. There's not much known about it except from archaeology. And each one of those megaliths were like 20 tons, kind of like Stonehenge, which weighs kind of comparable to it also as well. So, but you can see like the animals that are kind of carved onto it. You can see on some of those. And so these are some of the animals that they, I don't know, maybe worship, maybe as gods. I don't know, quite possible, that kind of thing. But they do think that early forms of religion are starting to kind of form at this point. There's another site you may have heard of called Çatalhöyük, which is also in Turkey as well. That one, yeah, I think there's kind of varies on the date on that one. It's spelled differently too. You'll see it spelled sometimes one word or two word, which if you want the translation of the name, Çatalhöyük means in Turkish fork mound because it's in the shape of a fork. The actual mound it was built on. It's located in southern Turkey, and you can see it dates back close to 10,000 years ago, 8,000 BC. It's actually a pretty large site, about 32 acres in size. And they do think that a lot of their settlements that were built there, they built mostly mud brick type houses, which you see this a lot throughout the Middle East because I guess it's not much stone or whatever. And so, founded in 1961, this particular site is pretty old too. It is actually one of the largest inhabited. I think there's a theory that 5 to 10,000 people may have lived there at one point. And here's some kind of images of what the excavation site looks like for Çatalhöyük. And I think there's a theory, if you go back to that image, which I had the one right here where it was, but they have these like a specialized mud brick type houses that they would construct, looks like with some wood. And they're known for the strange doorways. Like if you know, like most homes you go into, there's a door, front door, whatever, you go into it. Well, their doorways were in the ceiling where you had to climb down through the roof, I guess using a ladder system of some type. That was one thing that was kind of unique about their homes. I think they may have had some kind of paintings on the walls, kind of like plaster paintings or something like that. May have also been like murals or whatever, may have been part of the actual culture. Which kind of reminds me of the Minoans or something like that, as an actual ancient culture. Yeah, then there was that other one I was going to show you if I can get to it right here. There's one more they have that's kind of pretty old called Ein Ghazal, which they as a Neolithic site they found in Jordan in 1974. And it's like kind of northwest of the capital of Jordan, Amman. And it's an archaeological site where they think that they also built some kind of mud brick type settlements, which date back maybe 9,000 years ago. And it is, by the way, one of the largest Neolithic sites found, like going that far back, which maybe 37 acres in size to give you an idea. They may have had as many as 3,000 people living there. It's kind of debate about how many people were actually living there, but they do think that one thing it's very famous for that they discovered from archaeological digs there, they found these famous statues there that were often called the Ein Ghazal statues that were made of like plaster and reed. I think they found about 32 of them to be exact. And it depicts a lot of early statue art, like pre-pottery type artwork that's very well known. And it's probably one of the most famous first statues you start seeing where they start making statues, I guess, of themselves, I guess is what it kind of is, most likely. So Now I'll talk about one more thing briefly. Yeah, of course, some people talk about Stonehenge. That's a kind of a famous, kind of a Neolithic site, which it is, in southern England near the Salisbury Plain. That's kind of a very enigmatic, site that's very mysterious. It's got a lot of theories about, what Stonehenge was used for. They do think it was built sometime between 2000 to 3000 BC. So it kind of at least in in England at the time, and I guess ancient Britain, whatever, that would still be like the Stone Age kind of going on at the time. And there's kind of theories about why it was built. I think some theories are is that it was built as some kind of solar calendar to kind of mark the changing of the seasons, which is important, like in agriculture, knowing when to plant crops and to harvest crops and so on. And they put out other theories too that it may have been used for paganism, like the Celts, like the Druids, may have used it as like some forms of paganism also as well a long time ago. And I think most recently they found like people buried the site too, and it may have been used as a burial ground also as well. So yeah, that's one thing. Stonehenge is kind of a mystery, in back then in ancient times from a long time ago, and people. I think there's even some theories that King Arthur and all that are kind of somehow connected to that also as well. Let me get to one more thing today, and that's it. I want to talk about also the four river valley civilizations, because that's one thing, we're going to get more into later and talk about, like next week, I'll get into talking about Mesopotamia. And yeah, there's four river valley civilizations that kind of sprout up throughout the world, brought by the Bronze Age. Pretty much that's it. Mesopotamia, India, China, and Egypt. But they kind of break it down simply into those areas of the world. But they have other names too, like Mesopotamia is later called Iraq, of course, in modern times. And it's often referred to as the Tigris Euphrates River Valley civilizations that exist. And that Mesopotamia is considered the oldest of those river valley civilizations that first sprout up, with those two rivers, of course, the Tigris and the Euphrates being pretty big. India is the second oldest in South Asia, although India mostly starts in Pakistan. Is where it really is in parts of northern India. Indus River is the most important river because that's where you get the term word Indian or India and all that term Indian being used. Even the word Hindu, I think, is derived from it later from the word Sindhu, which is the actual Sanskritic name for India, Indus River. And the Ganges or Ganga River is also in like North India, eastern part of India, Bangladesh. It's also connected to India as well. China's got the Yellow River or Wang Ho, which is in eastern part of China or East Asia. That's the third oldest. And then don't forget Egypt in North Africa. The Nile River in modern Egypt. So it's actually the fourth oldest of the river valley civilizations, but it's the one I guess everybody kind of knows about, because the fact that it's kind of connected to like the pyramids and things like that from a long time ago. So here's kind of a better map showing you the locations of where they are from left to right, right there. Egypt, but that's not the order of how old they are, but those are the four right there that we'll talk about later.